Sometimes when a fraudulent person gets away with something heinous, they ought to think that crime doesn't pay is for losers. Elizabeth Holmes of Theranos had definitely thought that after becoming the youngest self-made billionaire woman in 2014. Born in 1986, Elizabeth Holmes is a former CEO of a medical diagnostic company called Theranos and currently is a convicted fraudster. Her 50% stake in the company earned her billions by 2014, but soon everything came to a halt when the serious accusations and questions were brought against the practices of Theranos. In 2018, she was forced to relinquish control of the company and got convicted in 2022. She is yet to be imprisoned though. Let's dive in to see how someone with such a progression could fall solo. Elizabeth Holmes grew up in Washington, D.C., and Houston, Texas, and spent time in China during high school where she started a business selling computer software to universities in Asia. She pursued a degree in electrical and chemical engineering at Stanford University and left during her sophomore year to launch Theranos, a company devoted to developing minimally invasive laboratory testing services. Theranos produced its first offering in 2014, a laboratory testing process that claimed to run more than 1,000 medical tests on an individual after collecting only a few drops of blood. Between 2003 and 2014, Holmes grew Theranos by securing funding from investors and developing the company's proprietary processes in secret. By 2014, Theranos had provided more than 200 diagnostic tests, was licensed to operate in almost all 50 U.S. states, and held a certification by the U.S. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, the federal regulator overseeing medical laboratories. Elizabeth Holmes obtained funding for her startup, Theranos, by securing investments from a variety of sources, including venture capitalists, high-profile investors, and corporations. She successfully raised hundreds of millions of dollars in funding for Theranos, based on her vision of a revolutionary blood testing technology that could perform hundreds of tests using just a few drops of blood. Additionally, Holmes was able to attract major partnerships, including a partnership with Walgreens, a leading pharmacy chain, which helped to further legitimize the company and attract additional investment. She was involved in a scandal where the company exaggerated the capabilities of their medical testing device, the Edison. In 2016, CMS blocked Theranos from receiving reimbursements from Medicare and Medicaid and banned Holmes from operating a medical laboratory for 2 years. In 2018, Holmes settled charges of fraud with the SEC and resigned as CEO. Later that year, Theranos ceased operations. In 2021, Holmes was tried in court for 11 counts of fraud and was convicted on 4 counts. She was sentenced to over 11 years in prison in 2022. Theranos' former president, Ramesh Balwani, was also found guilty of wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud in 2022. Questions against Theranos technology. Academics and medical researchers started to question the practices of Theranos around 2015 because of Holmes' insistence on secrecy and refusal to provide primary data for independent evaluation of testing efficiency of Theranos devices. An opinion paper called Theranos Phenomenon, Promises and Fallacies, written by Eleftherios Diamandis, a Canadian biochemist, in the journal Clinical Chemistry and Laboratory Medicine, CCLM, criticized Theranos for claiming absurd things about conventional testing done in centralized laboratories. Theranos claimed that the conventional laboratories take up to 4 days to compile test results, which is not true at all. Diamandis stated that it's far from the truth and 90% of the renal tests are done within an hour. He also claimed that the quality of the tests done by Theranos cannot be verified since the data is not provided to independent researchers and evaluators. He also contested the idea of Theranos being a cheaper option against centralized laboratory tests. According to him, conventional technology only becomes expensive with overhead and personnel costs. At Theranos, they were trying to identify early biochemical changes of diseases in asymptomatic individuals, which could lead to 5% false positive results, meaning abnormal test readings in otherwise normal individuals. This could lead to anxiety in patients, and investigating such false positive results could be rather expensive. Elizabeth Holmes also claimed that each test in centralized labs requires a separate test tube of blood sample, which is not accurate at all. With 7 milliliters of blood, around 100 tests can be done. When the questions regarding the efficacy of the Theranos testing abilities were first brought to question in 2014, It was only thought that they had only failed operationally, but questions regarding financial mishandling and breaking the investors' trust were brought after a while when Food and Drug Administration of USA opened investigation against them. On a website, Theranos were promising to analyze 240 different diseases according to Holmes, but around December 2014 John Carew of Wall Street Journal reported that a few employees had confessed of only 15 tests being done by their testing device called Edison. They were not so sure of the efficiency of the tests either. In fact, they were using traditional test equipment for most tests, and inaccuracies in Edison's testing results weren't reported either, which is a violation of federal rules for laboratories. Elizabeth Holmes hired Mr. Ian Gibbons, a British biochemist, to work on blood tests from micro amounts of fluids. He joined Theranos in 2005 and he committed suicide in 2013, and according to his widow, he was rather hopeless about the technology ever coming to reality towards the end of his life, although Theranos disputed during the time that its technology was ever failing. A lawyer representing Theranos even threatened to sue the widow of Mr. Ian Gibbons if she continued to talk to the media about it. Testing instruments like Edison didn't need to get approval from FDA because Theranos didn't sell it to other labs, but they applied for clearance for over 120 tests anyway. They never revealed whether or not they were approved. To receive payments from Medicare and Medicaid in the USA, accredited organizations send out samples to firms like Theranos several times a year, and they have to apply tests and send the reports back. If the results are close to the average of a peer group, a passing grade is given. Theranos applied for that, and according to some internal emails, they were using both the traditional testing machines and Theranos' proprietary Edison, and the results produced by Edison were off. One of the two main whistleblowers to Theranos' unethical practices was Erica Chung, who joined the company in 2013 but resigned very soon. In 2015, despite the intimidation and pressure from Theranos, she wrote an email to Center for Medicare and Medicaid containing details of Theranos' operations. She dubbed the testing device Edison of having major stability, precision and accuracy problems. Chung graduated from UC Berkeley in molecular and cell biology and joined Theranos in 2013. She was assigned to a quality control test program, and she had a great vantage point at Theranos where she could see the technology fail miserably. Reliable and repeatable results could not be achieved, and many results were discarded as anomalous because they were unfavorable. At the time, Theranos were installing the technology in the Walgreens stores, which was making the lives of people at risk. How did she manage to pull off such a grand scam? Elizabeth Holmes extracted millions of dollars in funding from seasoned venture capitalists and investors, and Theranos was soon valued at around $1 billion, but the technology she promised to deliver never took off. She did that while nobody was able to raise questions about the validity of the Theranos operations for over a decade. In his book Bad Blood, Secrets and Lies in Silicon Valley, John Carew estimated that one of the reasons for it was an extremely restrictive approach regarding the information shared outside the Theranos campus by the employees. They were made to sign non-disclosure agreements, and ex-employees were often intimidated through litigation. Although a few of the ex-employees still decided to blow the whistle, and that's how John was able to write the book and investigate what was going on behind the Theranos campus walls. Elizabeth Holmes has been found guilty of defrauding investors as founder and CEO of Theranos. After 4 months of court proceedings and 7 days of deliberations, the jury has reached a verdict that will have lasting implications in Silicon Valley and beyond. Although she wasn't found guilty of defrauding patients, the jury found her guilty of defrauding investors and conspiring to defraud investors. Theranos has been dissolved since 2018, and Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani have been indicted for fraud. Criminal trial was delayed due to the pandemic, and the prosecution spent 11 weeks questioning witnesses like Erica Chung, investors and medical professionals to develop a case against her. Prosecution said that she projected data in the direction of investors, which was misleading at the least. She contested against that and tried to put the blame on the scientists and engineers. Although prosecution was able to convince the jury that she knowingly misled the investors, one of their key investors, Rupert Murdoch of Wall Street Journal, came to Theranos headquarters and they manipulated his test results when the blood tests for demonstration were performed on him. Balwani, who faces a separate trial, was Holmes' boyfriend in secret. They met when Holmes was 18 and Balwani was 37. She moved in with him the year after she dropped out of Stanford. She also said during the trial that she was raped as a Stanford student, which is part of why she didn't finish her degree. She decided she was going to build a life by building this company. She detailed Balwani's controlling behavior, including a written document that dictated her daily schedule, including what she ate, when she slept and how she dressed. She said, "He was so disappointed in my mediocrity and he was trying to teach me how to be better." The jury deliberated for 7 days, even asking if they were allowed to take jury instructions home to review. They also asked to re-listen to some audio clips of Holmes' calls with investors, which had been presented as evidence. Yet deliberations continued into the new year. On the 7th day of deliberations, the jury submitted its third note to the judge, saying that it could not reach an unanimous verdict on 3 of the 11 counts. The prosecution suggested that Judge Davila read the jury an instructional document on what to do in the case of a deadlocked jury. Holmes' defense disagreed, saying that these instructions could be seen as coercive, but the judge proceeded to deliver the instructions. He also reminded the jury that Holmes would be presumed innocent until proven guilty. 4 hours later, the jury submitted another note stating that its members could still not reach an unanimous verdict on 3 charges. Shortly after, they presented their verdict on the 8 other counts. It's not unexpected for the deliberations in a prominent white-collar trial to take this long. The jury deliberated for 5 days before arriving at a verdict in Ghislaine Maxwell's recent 4-week trial. She was found guilty of 5 of 6 charges. In 2007, former press tycoon Conrad Black was of fraud convicted after 12 days of jury deliberations in a 14-week trial. The trial's verdict sends a message to tech founders that it's not okay to lie about your technology, especially not when it affects the health of real people. But it sends a mixed message that she was found not guilty of the counts related to defrauding patients. Beyond that, the case showed how important due diligence is for investors and partners collaborating with startups. Notably, Theranos investors weren't the usual suspect venture capital firms. Rather, her funding came from individuals like former Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, billionaire media mogul Rupert Murdoch, former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and the Walton family, among other wealthy elites. Some evidence showed that these investors were willing to give Theranos money even when Holmes evaded their more probing questions. But the investors' misplaced belief in Holmes wasn't the only thing propelling the faulty Theranos tech forward. Theranos and other diagnostics companies have exploited regulatory loopholes that allow devices that are not yet FDA approved to reach the market. There is not yet a date set for Holmes' sentencing hearing. The prosecution will not ask Holmes to be detained today, but said that the government wants either cash or property to secure her bond. Theranos isn't quite a thing of the past yet. Balwani awaits his own criminal fraud trial next year. Recent news regarding her incarceration. On April 27, she is anticipated to begin serving an 11-year prison sentence, following her conviction on 4 counts of fraud last year. Despite her legal team's efforts to postpone her incarceration, including a request for a new trial, Judge Edward Davila, who oversaw her high-profile case, has denied her bail application. Although Davila acknowledges that Holmes does not pose a flight risk or a danger to her community, the court has not discovered any compelling grounds to keep her out of jail. Holmes is expected to appeal this decision to the Ninth Circuit Court, but her appeal is unlikely to succeed, as the court rejected a similar appeal from former Theranos COO Ramesh Sunny Balwani, who was convicted on 12 counts of fraud. Holmes had claimed that she would raise significant questions that could justify a new trial. Her legal team also argued that she should be allowed to remain free to care for her 2 young children, one of whom was born this year. However, U.S. District Judge Edward Davila, in his ruling on Monday, stated that Holmes had failed to demonstrate that her appeal would result in a new trial. He remarked that Holmes' misrepresentations to Theranos investors went beyond just the accuracy and reliability of Theranos technology. Prosecutors, on the other hand, contended that Holmes was a flight risk because she had purchased a one-way plane ticket to Mexico during her trial. Holmes' lawyers argued that she and her partner Billy Evans had intended to attend a wedding and hoped that she would be acquitted. In his ruling, Judge Davila acknowledged that the ticket purchase was unwise, but he stated that it did not indicate an attempt to flee. He added that booking international travel plans for a criminal defendant in anticipation of a complete defense victory is a bold move, and the failure to promptly cancel those plans after a guilty verdict is a perilously careless oversight. Holmes was found guilty of 4 counts of fraud in January of last year and expressed deep pain for those who were deceived by the scam during her court appearance. It is anticipated that Holmes will make another attempt to avoid imprisonment while her appeal is pending, which may take at least a year, by appealing to a San Francisco court to overturn her conviction. The BBC has attempted to contact Holmes' legal team for a response. Last year, Holmes' former business associate, Sunny Balwani, was sentenced to almost 13 years in jail for fraud.